We're going to go through the translation of some simple Greek sentences, and they're based on the language exercise 7 from Grand Canyon Theological Seminary Elementary Greek. The textbook we will be referring to is William D. Mount's Basics of Biblical Greek Grammar, the 3rd edition, and there is the bibliographical information. First example is going to come from Matthew 1:21. So we have kai kaleses ta anima autou Yesun. Autas gar sose tan laan autou apaton hamartion auton. So we begin with kai, that is our typical and. Many verses begin with that, particularly in the Gospels, where some of the Gospels follow a somewhat Hebrew style, where many sentences begin with the word and. And then we have a verb here, kaleses. So we have what looks like the stem from kaleo. So when we look at verbs, we notice that nothing has been added to the beginning of this verb. We then notice that there has been a sigma introduced into the middle of the word. So this is pointing us to a future tense. So we have likely here a future, and then the ending here, epsilon iota sigma, is pointing to active, indicative, and the ending itself, the epsilon iota sigma, we can go find that in our chart if we haven't memorized it already. This will be on Mount's page 357. He's got a big overview of the indicative here. And we'll notice that the ending ses here is under future active indicative second singular. The sigma is the addition, and then the epsilon iota sigma is the ending. That's actually the same as for the present tense, but the difference is that we have this sigma put in the middle. But the epsilon iota sigma indicates that we're looking at a second person singular. So we'll come back over here. We have a second singular, and our root is kaleo. Okay, we need a little sidebar to talk about what happens in certain cases when a sigma tense formative comes after a stem vowel that's a contract vowel. So we've been looking at kaleo, and kaleo is a contract verb. Notice that the end of the stem is an epsilon. And as you may know, a contract stem ends in alpha, epsilon, or omicron. And as you can see, kaleo, this is the lexical form, the stem ends in epsilon, so it's a contract verb. Note what happens here when we add the normal present active indicative ending, which is the omega. The omega contracts with the epsilon, and then we just get kalo. This is the actual present active indicative first person singular, is kalo, and the circumflex tells us that the vowel contracted. Now, notice that when we add the sigma tense formative to form the future tense, I've got it shaded in green here, we get kaleses. Now we need to look at a rule on Mounce's textbook, page 160, section 19.15, because we're going to find out that kaleo is an exception to this rule. So let's take a look at the rule. Again, this is on page 160. And the rule says that when contract verbs, it's a stem ending in alpha, epsilon, or omicron, have a sigma tense formative added to the stem for some tense, example is the future tense, the vowel lengthens. But as you can see here, in kaleses, the vowel doesn't lengthen. It remains epsilon. So I'm going to modify Mounce's rule and say the vowel often lengthens, but it does not always lengthen. Now let's look at some examples where the vowel actually does lengthen. So our first example, where we're going to have the contract stem, agapa. I've got the actual contract vowel in red. Then the sigma tense formative, and then the actual ending, which here for first singular is going to be our omega. Notice that in our future form, the alpha lengthens to an eta, so we get agapeso. So this is an example where we have a contract vowel and it lengthens before the sigma. This is future active indicative, first person singular. Let's look at another example. For this example, we have poieo. And so here is our contract vowel, the epsilon. We're adding the sigma, and now we're going to be adding a second singular ending. This is just an example. And note that the final form is going to be poieses. So the epsilon contract vowel lengthens to an eta. This is future active indicative, second person singular. Now that second singular ending comes after the tense formative sigma, and before that our contract vowel lengthens. Let's look at one more example. Here is plerao. So here is plera. We have an omicron as our contract vowel. We're going to add the tense formative for the future tense, and then we're going to add a third person plural ending, which is usin. Could be either usi or usin. Either one works. When we add all these together, we end up with pleirosusin. So notice that the omicron before the sigma lengthens to an omega. So that's our future active indicative third person plural. So this is the way that this rule in Mounce's textbook, page 160, usually works. But there are exceptions. And so we saw one up here. We saw that kaleo, when it becomes a future, that epsilon stays the way it is. Another example we'll see as we go through our exercises is the verb teleo. So there's another example. The lexical form is teleo. We have no examples for teleo of future active indicative in the Bible, but we do have a passive. So we put the tense formative in there and then the passive ending, thesontai, for third person plural. Notice that the epsilon does not lengthen. So I think we can express our rule by saying that when contract verbs have a sigma tense formative added to the stem, the vowel often lengthens. So we need to be prepared for the vowel lengthening, but we also need to note that there are exceptions. So returning to Matthew 1:21, we've been looking at the word kaleses. So it's future and it's second person, so it's you, whoops, back to English, you will call. Now we're expecting something here that's going to be accusative, and sure enough we find ta anima. So we have this nice neuter accusative. It could be neuter nominative, but we're expecting an accusative. So we have a neuter and it is accusative singular, and then anima, this is a neuter noun meaning name, and the ending there is consistent with accusative singular. So you will call the name And then we have a pronoun, third person, with a genitive ending, genitive singular. So we're going to say, you will call the name of him, or we would probably then change this to his name to make it more normal English. And then finally we have this proper name, Yesun. At this point, I want to talk briefly about proper names that have been imported from Hebrew into Greek. They can be tricky. So consider the name Mariam, that's Mary. That really has very few variants, and so sometimes we can't tell what case it is based on the ending. Technically, Greek does not allow words that end with mu, but when we import a name in from Hebrew, we get these unusual names that actually do sort of violate the rules of Greek. Matthew 13:55 is a good example here. They have several proper names, including Mariam, Mary, and then the brothers of Jesus, Jacobos, which would be Jacob, Yosef, which would be Joseph, Simon, and that is Simon or Simeon, and Judas, which would be Judah. So in order to figure out what's going on with these words when we see them and to figure out what case we're looking at, we need to look at a lexicon. So I'm going to come over to accordance here to Matthew 1:21, which is what we're looking at, and here's our word, Yesun. Now I can simply hover over this, and down in my bottom window, if I've got the instant detail set up to show all the time, I come down here to the bottom and I notice that I have a noun, masculine, singular, accusative. So it's telling me that it's accusative, so I pretty much am done. But if I want to go and check some more information, I can triple click on this. So 1, 2, 3, triple click on it, and I get Thayer's dictionary to come up. I have my triple click default set to Thayer. If it's set to something else like Newman, you can also just come over here and then choose Thayer. So notice it says here's my lexical form is Jesus, and then Thayer's gives it there in transliteration. Then Yesu is my genitive, and I come over here, it gives me the dative form, which looks the same as the genitive, and proper names are like this. They do very strange things. They don't follow the normal rules. And then we have the accusative over here is Yesun, which is what we see we were looking at over here in our verse. So Yesun is an accusative. So we see that these proper names, Mariam, Jacobos, they don't follow the normal rules of Greek necessarily. And so often we will just have to look them up as special cases. So in summary, it is an accusative ending. So you shall call his name Jesus. Now this little dot up here is a somewhat like a semicolon. In Greek, a regular period that, like our period, is a real period, a full break like in English. A dot up high is more like one of our semicolons. It's a softer break than a period. You will call his name Jesus. I guess I'll do a comma here. Now we have our autos, and that is our pronoun again, third person, and it's nominative singular. So he, notice we have this gar. Gar is what's known as a post-positive conjunction. And so it comes after the first word of a sentence. So we would put it before. We would say, for he will do something. Gar can mean for. It can also mean so then. It has various meanings, but here we'll just say it means for. The idea of a post-positive is seen sometimes in English For example, if I were to say, he came therefore to see me, notice that the therefore is coming after the beginning of the sentence. Sometimes we do that. The word however is also the same. He, however, came to see me. Notice that it's similarly comes after the beginning of the sentence. So this is what we do in Greek with several of these words. And in one of the cases, this word gar will show up after the beginning of the sentence, but in English we'll put it at the beginning. So for he, and that is the explicit he with this pronoun, now we have sose. This is an interesting word. Looking at the beginning here, the sigma omega, I'm thinking that this is probably the verb sozo. Before we go on, we need to look at the square of stops. These are covered on mounts on page 161, although the chart itself may not show up in your online edition of this book. So what we do when we form a future and also a first aorist is we stick a sigma in between the stem and the ending. Now this is not a big deal, except that for certain letters, when that stem comes up against the sigma, some changes happen. So we have stems ending in these labials, things that we do with our lips, the P, the B, and the phi. When those come up against sigmas, so we have the P against a sigma, the beta against a sigma, or the phi against a sigma, these all turn into the letter psi. It makes sense with a P and an S coming together. You get that ps. Same with a B or a phi. They come together and they make the letter psi. So for example, when I have the root blepo, here's our stem blep, if I put the sigma in there and then put my ending on it, that P and that sigma come together to be blepsamin. Notice that the sound is the same. It's blepsamin, but the letter is the psi letter rather than the two letters P and sigma. Similarly, when I have my velars, so it's kappa, gamma, and chi, when one of these velars comes up against a sigma, and so I have a kappa sigma, a gamma sigma, or a chi sigma, that's going to turn into a xi. So for example, my stem dioke, the verb dioko, which means to persecute or to pursue, if I have dioke, then I have a sigma added in the middle, and then here's a third plural ending. I'm going to end up with dioxusin. So that kappa sigma are converted over to the xi. The sound is the same. When I say dioxusin, I would say it the same if I had a kappa sigma or if I had a xi, but it just compresses those into the corresponding one letter that makes the same sound. Finally, with the dentals, the tau, the delta, or the theta, these are made with your tongue and your teeth, hence the name dental. If these come up against a sigma, in all these cases, the letter actually drops out and we're just left with a sigma. For some verbs, if the stem has a zeta, for instance, our stem sozo, we need to look at the actual original stem. And the original stem was not a zeta, it was a delta. So the stem for soz is sod. Then if we add the middle consonant sigma and put an ending on that, we end up with soses. The zeta in this stem is actually a delta, and then by this rule, the delta drops out. We just have the sigma, and so we have the delta dropping out and we have sosace. I did not put a accent in there. I'll do that now just so everybody's happy. Sosace. All right, so that brings us back to our example here. So, and you will call his name Jesus for, and here we have sose. So this is our root sozo, and our ending here is our third singular ending. So again, if I go back to my chart on page 357, and I see say right there, it's third singular, future, active, indicative. There was nothing at the beginning of this. Again, we saw nothing added to the beginning of this. We want to check that even though we haven't seen any of those kind of verbs yet. So we have a future, back to English, future active indicative third singular, and our root is sozo. And that's the verb for to save, and it's future, so he will save. Now we have tan laan, we have a accusative masculine singular definite article, and then laan we have the masculine word laos in the accusative form, the accusative ending there. So he will save, and we're looking for an accusative because we're looking for what he will save, and so the object of that verb is the people. He will save the people, and then right after that we have our genitive pronoun, and that's a third person. We have a genitive singular ending, save the people of him. He will save the people of him, and we would translate that as he will save his people. And now finally we have this prepositional phrase down here, apa ton hamartion auton. Apa is our preposition. It means from or out of. We'll just put from for right now. We are expecting a genitive as the object of the preposition apa, and here we have a genitive definite article. So we have a genitive plural definite article, and we have hamartion. This is a feminine noun from hamartia. The omega nu ending will be genitive plural for both first and second declension. And then we have auton. So we have he will save his people from, and we don't put the of in here because we're following a preposition. The preposition overrides the inbuilt of the genitive. So we have from the sins, it's plural, and then auton. This is also plural, genitive, and so we're going to say of, that's our genitive, and then the preposition itself is plural, of them, third person. So he will save his people from the sins of them, or we would say from their sins. So, and you will call his name Jesus, for he will save his people from their sins. That's Matthew 1:21. Let me note one last thing here, and that is because we have an explicit subject, autas, we could say he himself will save his people from their sins. Without the autas, the verb here has the pronoun built into it. We have the explicit pronoun here. So there might be emphasis for he will save his people, or he himself will save his people from their sins. Let's move on to a second one here then. We have pistas hakurias kai autas telese tan lagan autu. What we have here looks like a classic case of a predicative adjective. So we have a nominative adjective, masculine singular, and then we have an article, nominative masculine singular article, and then we have a noun. So here we have adjective, article, noun, and that would then be pistos is faithful, so faithful is the Lord, or we might say the Lord is faithful. So the Lord is faithful. So they match in case number and gender, and the fact that they're nominatives, usually when an adjective is predicative, it's in the nominative case. It's not always true, but it will be the same case, number and gender, as the noun that it's being equated to. So we're supplying the is. The Lord is faithful. Greek does have commas. They're a lot like English commas. So then we have kai and, put that right in, autas. So here's again we have a explicit pronoun, and it's nominative, masculine, singular, third person. So it's he, possibly it, but it looks like we're talking about the Lord. So the Lord and he, and now we have telese. As a hint, this comes from our verb teleo. That means to complete, to fulfill, to finish. It's the verb used in John 19:30 when Jesus says to telestai. It's a perfect passive, and it means it is finished. So let's take a look here. We have telese. Notice that even though this is a contract verb, because of this handy consonant, the sigma that's stuck in the middle, we no longer have to worry about contraction because this epsilon is not bumping up against this epsilon in the ending. The sigma is separating them. So there is one advantage of tenses that add a consonant in the middle, that they remove our need to account for contraction. So this is, again, we have the sigma, we have nothing added to the beginning, so we're looking at future, and we have the EI or the epsilon iota ending, and so we're going to be looking at a future active indicative third singular. I got that. I could go look at the chart, but I already know what this is. So, and he will complete or he will finish, and we're looking for something that he will finish, so we're expecting an accusative. Here's our accusative, masculine singular, definite article, and then logon, our accusative, masculine singular noun, and so he will finish the word, and then finally we have the genitive pronoun. And when you see a genitive, just get used to thinking of it in terms of something else that it's going to be working with. So we have he will finish the word of him, or he will fulfill the word of him, and we're going to then translate that as he will finish his word, or maybe he will fulfill his word. So the Lord is faithful and he will fulfill his word. Okay, I want to repeat my spin-off of Mounce's rule, my slightly modified version of Mounce's rule from page 160 from his textbook. When a sigma tense formative is added after a contract vowel, the vowel often lengthens. So my little modification is that it often lengthens. And so we need to be prepared for that. But there are exceptions such as kaleo and teleo. So the example we just looked at, I gave you telese, and here the epsilon did not lengthen. So let's try an example, the same sentence, but we'll just change out the verb. We'll change it to poieo. So here we have the same beginning. The Lord is faithful, or faithful is the Lord, and he, and then I guess that autos could be he himself, since it's an explicit pronoun. Then we have poiese. Now this is a future active indicative, and that is third person singular. And notice that for this root, which is poieo, the epsilon lengthens before that tense formative sigma, it lengthens to eta. And so here's a case where the normal rule is in force. Here we have the Lord is faithful, and he himself, or he, and he will do, and we would add he will do it. We might also be able to say, and he will act. The Lord is faithful, and he himself will do it. This is actually very similar to 1 Thessalonians 5:24. This verse says, he who called you is faithful, rather than the Lord is faithful. So he who called you is faithful, and he will do it. And in that verse, the autos does not appear. And so the verse simply ends with kai poiese. And so it just means, and he will do, or he will do it. So my main point here is that we can find exceptions to the rule that the vowel lengthens when we have a contract vowel that comes before a tense formative. Let's look at a third example. We have akousamen ta euangelion to agathou theou. So here is akousamen. You might figure out that that is from akouo. So nothing has been added to change that initial alpha. And we have a sigma showing up in the middle. So it looks like we're looking at future. So we have future, and let's look at our ending. Amen. That's one of our active endings. I can go back to our chart and verify that. But we already should know by now that this is an active ending, an amen ending. So we'll come back over. And so it's a future active indicative, and now the ending itself we saw was first plural. And so we have we will hear, or we will listen to, and then we're looking for accusative, and here is euangelion. That's a neuter. It could be either nominative or accusative because the ending is the same, but we're expecting an accusative. So we will hear the good news, and so ta euangelion, the good news. And now we have this genitive phrase coming after it. And so we have to agathou. The to is our genitive singular definite article. Then we have agathou, which is an adjective that is modifying theou. And so we have article, adjective, noun, our first attributive pattern. This will be the good God, and the genitive makes it of the good God. So we will hear the good news of the good God. It's a little bit mechanical. Let me add hamon here, and that'll make it sound a little bit better. So we will hear the good news of the good God, and then this is a pronoun genitive, first person plural, so of us, or we will hear the good news of our good God. I like that a little bit better. We will hear the good news, or we will hear the gospel of our good God. All right, let's look at one more here. Starting here, number 4. Ha theas met auton estai. kai hathanatas estai nekros. So we begin with hatheas. That is a nominative masculine singular, definite article, and noun. So it would be the God, although for our capital G God in English, we don't add the definite article. Then we have a prepositional phrase, metauton. This is our preposition meta, but the alpha at the beginning of the next word causes the alpha at the end of meta to drop out, and we just put a Greek apostrophe in there. So we have a genitive object of the preposition, and when meta has an object that's genitive, it means with. So we have the God with, and then auton is our genitive plural. It's a third person pronoun, so with them. Then we have estai. Estai is a future form of a me. Let's go check that out in Mounts, page 359. And we're looking at the indicatives. Future, here is estai. It's third singular. Notice that no voice is given here. So voice would be active, middle, passive. And for a me, Mounts does not give a voice, and that's fine. The endings look somewhat like they're middle passive, but for a me, we don't need to worry about voice. This is our third singular, future indicative, and it's singular, so it's referring back here to the subject of the sentence, which is God. God with them will be, and probably we would smooth that out into English as God will be with them. Then we'll come over to the last part, kai hathanatas. Here, the kai is the beginning of a sentence. Generally, that will mean and. Kai can mean other things depending on where it appears, but when it's right at the beginning of a sentence, we can just default it to and. Then we have hathanatas. Again, it's a nominative masculine singular article, and thanatos is death, and it is also masculine, second declension, so we have a nominative masculine singular ending. And so literally we have and the death. Then we have estai again, which means will be, the same verb that we had here. Estai will give us will be. Then we have an adjective here, nekros, and that means dead. This is one of our typical noun equals adjective with a to be verb in between them. And they have to match in case, number, and gender. So we have nominative masculine singular and nominative masculine singular. So God will be with them, and we probably will leave the out, and death will be dead. So God will be with them, and death will be dead. Okay, I appreciate your hanging with me.